The day Eli Merritt walked out of Hargrove House for the last time, he didn't look back. Not because he wasn't scared, because he was. And he'd learned a long time ago that looking back only made the scared thing bigger. He was 18 years old. Everything he owned was in a backpack that had belonged to someone else first. 2 shirts, 1 pair of jeans with a tear at the left knee he'd been meaning to fix for 6 months, a library card that technically expired in April, and $47 and some change in a zippered pocket with a broken zipper. That was it. That was the whole inventory of Eli Merritt's life on the morning of June 3rd. He stood on the sidewalk outside Hargrove House and breathed in the Savannah air. Thick, green, heavy with the smell of the river 2 blocks west, and the magnolias that lined the street like they'd been there since before anyone thought to name the street anything. Beautiful city. Savannah. Didn't feel that way when you were 6 and terrified and being dropped off at the front door by a woman who said she'd come back. She didn't come back, but the magnolias were still beautiful. Even then, even now. Eli adjusted the backpack on his shoulder and started walking. The apartment was on Hartwell Lane, 2nd floor, above a dry cleaning shop that had been there since 1971, according to the hand-painted sign above the door, and smelled like it. Chemical, warm, a little like the inside of a very old coat. The apartment was $420 a month. Eli cleared around $1,400 working dinner service at Magnolia Table on Broughton Street. After rent, after utilities, after the particular math of keeping a 10-year-old in school lunches and decent shoes, what was left was thin. Thin enough that breakfast was a decision, not a given, which meant every morning, without fail, without thinking about it twice. Eli gave Birch the bigger half. Birch was 10 years old. He had hair that defeated every comb that had ever tried it. Brown, wild, sticking up in the back no matter what Eli did, and he'd tried conditioner once, which had been a mistake. He had eyes too big for his face, not in a cute way. In the way that happens to kids who've learned early that adults say one thing and mean another, and you'd better be watching closely if you want any warning. He'd been in the system for 2 years, 7 placements in 24 months. The file said behavioral issues, said history of aggression, said placement disruptions. What the file didn't say, what no file ever said, because no file ever did, was that every single one of those placements had ended because a grown adult had made a promise and broken it. And Birch had eventually stopped being quiet about it, which they called aggression, which Eli called something else. He didn't say that to the caseworker, obviously. He said it internally, at length. But what he actually told the court was simpler. He said, "I know what it's like to be that kid, and I'm not going anywhere. Provisional guardianship, temporary on paper. A trial run," the caseworker said. Like Birch was a car you took around the block before deciding. Eli didn't say that out loud either. He said thank you. He signed the papers. He brought Birch home to the apartment above the dry cleaner, and the first morning he cut the bread in half, slid the bigger piece across the table, and said, "Eat. You've got school." Birch looked at the bread, looked at Eli. "You already ate." "Yeah." A pause, long enough. "Okay." And he ate. He didn't ask again after that, but he noticed. Eli could tell. Because Birch noticed everything that was the whole thing about Birch. He was a 10-year-old with the observational skills of a much-used person, and he missed nothing. He just chose, for reasons of his own, not to push. That was fine. That was more than fine. They understood each other without having to say it, which was, Eli had come to believe, the definition of home. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Plain white envelope, official-looking. Return address from something called Thayer and Associates, 44 Drayton Street, Savannah, Georgia. Eli looked at it for a long time at the kitchen table. Birch looked at Eli, looking at it. "You gonna open it?" "Yeah." "When?" "Give me a second." "It's been like a minute." Birch, "I'm just saying." Eli opened the letter. It was an invitation. That was the word they used. Invitation. Like it was something pleasant. Like it was a birthday party. You are hereby invited to attend the reading of the last will and testament of Gertrude May Calloway at the offices of Thayer and Associates. Gertrude Calloway. Eli said the name out loud, quietly. Nothing. No recognition. No memory. No tug of anything. He'd never heard that name in his life. But the letter had his full name on it, his address, his date of birth, and it said your presence is required in that particular way. Legal letters said things which meant it wasn't really an invitation, which meant he didn't really have a choice. He read it again. Gertrude Calloway, founder of something called Calloway Press, which sounded like a printing company, which sounded like absolutely nothing to do with him. He put the letter down. "What is it?" Birch said. "Someone died." "Who?" "I don't know." "Then why?" "I don't know, Birch." Birch looked at the letter, looked at Eli, decided correctly that this was a moment not to push. "You want the rest of my bread?" Eli almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. Gertrude Calloway. He looked her up that night on his phone. Cracked screen, slow Wi-Fi. He had to wait for the page to load twice. She had been 78 years old, white-haired, small in photographs, the kind of old woman who looked like she'd been formidable once and then settled into something quieter and more permanent, like a tree that wasn't growing anymore, but had absolutely no intention of being moved. She'd founded Calloway Press in 1974, started with one community newspaper, grew it to 4 all across Savannah and 2 neighboring counties, regional news, local stories, the kind of journalism that covered school board meetings and county fairs and the obituaries of people who had never been famous but had mattered to the people around them. She died 3 weeks ago. Quietly, the article said. At home, she had one surviving family member listed, a nephew, Preston Calloway. Eli read that twice. Nephew, not son, not daughter, nephew. And then he read his name in a legal letter from the woman's estate, which made no sense, which was going to keep him up tonight, which it did. The offices of Thayer and Associates were on Drayton Street in a building that had probably been a house first. Old brick, high ceilings, the kind of rooms that had been waiting patiently for 200 years and had gotten very good at it. Eli wore the nicest thing he owned, which was a gray button-down that Birch had decided helpfully to iron that morning. Birch had never ironed anything in his life. The result was a shirt that was mostly wrinkle-free, except for a diagonal crease across the left shoulder that looked like it had been put there on purpose by someone who really committed to a bad decision. He wore it anyway. He walked in. The room was full of people who knew exactly why they were there. Eli was not one of those people. There was a long table, dark wood, the kind of table that had absorbed 100 years of serious conversation and smelled faintly of furniture polish and old decisions. Legal pads and glasses of water sat in front of each chair, which felt formal, in a way that made Eli's hands want to do something useful, and there was nothing for them to do. He sat down at the end, the far end, the chairs closest to the door. Old habit. Always know where the exit is. At the head of the table sat a man who did not need an introduction, but was going to get one eventually anyway, because he was that kind of man. 62, maybe, 63. Silver at the temples. Vest that fit like it had been made for him, which it probably had. Gold ring on the right hand. A jaw like something carved from material that didn't soften easily. Eyes that were currently busy doing the thing powerful people's eyes did when they entered a room, deciding immediately what everything was worth and what it wasn't. Preston Calloway. Eli knew it without being told. The shape of a man who owned the room and knew it, and was fine with you knowing it too. There was a woman beside him, late 50s, silver hair pulled back cleanly. Good posture. Pearls at her throat that didn't look like jewelry so much as armor. She was looking at her hands, which were folded on the table, and she wasn't looking at anything else. Not at Preston, not at the room, just at her own hands, the way you look at something when you're making sure you don't look anywhere else. And at the head of the opposite end, a man that Eli had not noticed at first, because he was the kind of man you didn't notice until you did, and then you understood immediately that you had been wrong not to. Edmund Thayer, 67, maybe older, gray suit, still eyes, a face that had seen a great deal and decided to hold most of it in reserve. He was looking at Eli in the way that people looked at you when they'd been waiting for you for a long time and weren't going to say so. Eli sat down. The reading began. Thayer read it all in a voice like water over gravel. Steady, unhurried. Each clause landed and settled before he moved to the next. The newspaper holdings went to a charitable media trust with conditions Eli didn't fully follow. Real estate in 2 counties, personal effects to be distributed, a scholarship fund for journalism students at Savannah State, a donation to the Historic Preservation Society, a specific bequest to the dry cleaner on Forsyth, who had cleaned her husband's suits for 30 years and never once charged her extra for rush service. Eli sat and listened and understood that none of this had anything to do with him, until the last one. Thayer turned a page, looked up briefly, then back down. To Eli Merritt, he read, of 14 Hartwell Lane, Savannah, Mrs. Calloway, bequeaths the sum of $1. The room was very quiet. Then Preston Calloway made a sound. Not a laugh exactly. Not quite. More like the sound a man made when he was too polished to laugh openly, but too amused to stay completely silent. A small exhale. A private smile directed at the table in front of him. "The old dear," he said to no one in particular. Warm, fond, dismissive in that careful way that was worse than being openly dismissive. Always had a sense of theater at the end. Somebody coughed. Somebody else shifted in their chair. Thayer slid the envelope down the table. Eli caught it. It was small, plain, his name written on the front in handwriting that was old but precise, the handwriting of someone who had once been careful and stayed careful. He opened it. Inside, a $1 bill. Old. Worn. The creases soft from years of folding. The kind of bill that had changed hands 100 times and remembered all of them. Eli looked at it, and then he saw it. Bottom right corner. Pencil. Faint. The marks of someone writing small on purpose. The marks of someone who understood that some things needed to be hidden in plain sight. West Storage. The Double Oak. Thayer will take you. 4 words per line, maybe 9 words total. He read it twice. He looked up. Preston Calloway was already talking to someone beside him, easy and low. The woman Sylvia was still looking at her hands. Thayer was closing his folder with the calm efficiency of a man who had just done exactly what he intended to do. No one was watching Eli. Eli folded the dollar bill in half, then again, tucked it into the front pocket of his shirt right over his heart, stood up. "Thank you for your time," he said. His voice didn't shake. He made sure of that. And he walked out. He made it 2 blocks before he stopped walking, leaned against the iron fence of a small park, and just stood there. Savannah did this. The city was full of small parks with old trees and iron fences and benches that had been sitting there long enough to be comfortable about it. He leaned against the fence and let the thick green air settle over him. "West Storage, the Double Oak. Thayer will take you." "Okay." So, a dead woman he'd never met had left him $1 with a hidden message. That was a sentence. That was a sentence that existed in the world now. He pressed his hand flat against his shirt, against the folded bill in his pocket. A dead woman he'd never met knew his name, his address, his date of birth. A dead woman he'd never met had written him a message she'd hidden, where only he would find it, which meant she'd planned it, which meant she'd thought about him specifically, which meant there was something underneath all of this that he did not yet understand. Eli breathed in the air, held it, let it out. "Okay," he thought. "Okay." He started walking again. He needed to pick up Birch by 3. He had questions. He had a lot of questions. But he had a kid to pick up first. Birch took one look at him when he walked through the school gate and said, "What happened?" "I'll tell you later." "That bad?" "Not bad, just complicated." "Did someone yell at you?" "No." "Did you yell at someone?" "Birch, you looked like you wanted to." "I always look like I want to yell at someone, that's just my face." "True," Birch said, which was fair. They walked home in the afternoon heat. Savannah June. The kind of warm that settled on your shoulders like something physical. The river smell came and went on the breeze, salt and green water, and something ancient underneath both. Eli didn't say anything about the dollar or the message or the handwriting. Not yet. He held it inside his chest like the bill itself. Folded. Careful. He was still sitting at the kitchen table at 10 o'clock when the knock came. 3 knocks. Measured. Patient. The kind of knock that knew it was expected. Eli opened the door. Edmund Thayer stood in the hallway in a different suit from this afternoon, but the same still eyes. Same calm. Same quality of a man who had been in a hurry once and had finished with all of that. "Mr. Merritt," he said. "I figured you'd come tonight," Eli said. "Did you?" "She planned this carefully. You planned carefully. Tonight made sense." Thayer almost smiled. "May I come in?" Eli stepped back. Thayer came inside. Looked at the room the way he'd looked at Eli at the table today. Not assessing. Recording. A man who intended to remember what he saw. The small kitchen. The second-hand table. The 2 chairs, one of which had a cracked leg that Eli had fixed with a hardware store bolt. The half loaf of bread on the counter. The light that hummed slightly when it was cold. He looked at all of it. His face didn't change. "She's not a stranger," Thayer said. "Mrs. Calloway." "I figured that too." "Sit down, son." "Don't call me that." A pause. "My apologies," Thayer said. And he meant it. You could tell when a man meant something and when he was just performing the shape of meaning it, and Thayer meant it. Eli sat down. Thayer sat across from him, folded his hands on the table, looked at Eli steadily in the way of someone who was about to say something that required a foundation first, and the foundation required care. "Gertrude Calloway," Thayer said, "was your grandmother." The apartment was very quiet. From downstairs, faintly, the dry cleaner's exhaust fan hummed. Somewhere outside, a car passed. Birch was asleep in the back room. Eli could hear the particular quality of silence that meant someone was sleeping just on the other side of a thin wall. "My grandmother," Eli said. "Yes." "I don't have a grandmother." "You did. You do. She died 3 weeks ago." "I don't have family." "Mr. Merritt, I have spent 18 years in this system." Eli's voice stayed flat, level. It cost him something to keep it that way. "I have a file that has almost nothing in it. I have a last name that the state gave me. I have—" He stopped, started again. "I don't have family. I have never had family. So if this is a story you're about to tell me—" "Your father's name was Daniel," Thayer said. And that was the word that stopped everything. Daniel. Eli's father's name in the file was listed as unknown. That was the word the file used. Unknown. Like a weather event. Like a category of thing rather than a person. "Daniel Merritt," Thayer continued, quietly, without rushing it. "He took his mother's last name because he never knew his father. He was Gertrude's son, her only child. Born in 1971 before she was married, before she was anything yet. She was 22 years old and alone, and she made a choice she spent the rest of her life trying to understand." Eli looked at the table. "She kept him at first," Thayer said. "For 2 years she kept him, and then she married a man who didn't know about Daniel. And Daniel went into the system, and Gertrude spent the next 30 years building a newspaper and writing in her journals about a son she'd given up and could not stop loving. A breath. Your father grew up the same way you did. He aged out of the system at 18. He met your mother shortly after. When you were 2 years old, he died. And your mother was not able to care for you. And you went into the system. And Gertrude found out when you were 4 years old. And she tried to reach you. Eli looked up. She tried, Thayer repeated. Letters, calls to the agency, a lawyer's inquiry, a visit to the group home you were placed at in 2012. She tried 7 separate times over 14 years, and she was turned away or ignored or given information that simply... He stopped. Simply what? Eli said. Was wrong, Thayer said. Deliberately wrong. The room was still. Preston Calloway, Thayer said. He kept his voice even, professional, but something moved behind his eyes that was not professional at all. He managed Mrs. Calloway's personal affairs for the last 12 years, since she became ill. He had full access to her correspondence, her legal communications, her medical records. He blocked her, Eli said. Not a question. Thayer nodded. Once. We believe every attempt she made to contact you was intercepted. We have partial records. Letters returned to sender with incorrect forwarding addresses. Agency inquiries answered on Calloway letterhead, saying she had withdrawn her interest. A visit in 2012 to Linden House where you were placed. The home director received a call from the Calloway family office an hour before she arrived, and by the time she got there, she was told the placement records were sealed. Eli sat very still. 18 years. 18 years of one room after another. Of learning to read which adults would stay and which wouldn't. Of being the kid nobody counted. Of sitting in the waiting rooms and the donation lines and the classrooms where the teacher already had your file and had already decided something about you before you sat down. 18 years of believing there was nobody. And the whole time. An old woman in a house in Savannah had been trying to get to him. Eli pressed his hands flat against the table. He breathed. He was not going to cry in front of this man. He'd made a decision about that, somewhere around age 9, and he'd held it since. Preston didn't want a grandchild in the picture, he said. Preston didn't want a legitimate heir, Thayer said. Mrs. Calloway's will the real one makes provision for you as trustee of Calloway Press. If you exist, if you're found, if you're in the picture. The real one, Eli said. The document read today was not the document Mrs. Calloway signed in my office 14 months ago. The air changed in the room. Something shifted, quietly, the way something shifts when you realize the floor under you is not what you thought it was. He changed the will, Eli said. We believe the document substitution occurred approximately 8 weeks before Mrs. Calloway's death, when she was ill enough that she could not have verified the content in detail, when her signature could be reproduced under circumstances that would be difficult to contest. Eli looked at his hands, thought about Birch asleep in the back room, thought about a dollar bill in his shirt pocket. What happens now? He said. Thayer reached into his jacket, produced a small envelope of his own, placed it on the table. Mrs. Calloway was very specific about the order, he said. She knew this might happen. She had known Preston for 30 years and she understood him. This envelope contains her letter to you. She asked me to give it to you before anything else, before the rest. Eli looked at the envelope, his name on the front. Same handwriting as the dollar bill, old and careful and precise. He didn't pick it up yet. And after the letter, he said, What's the rest? There is a property, Thayer said. A small farm west of the city. Mrs. Calloway held it under a separate private arrangement that has nothing to do with the estate Preston currently controls. He doesn't know it exists. A hidden property. She called it the West Place. She went there to think, to write. She kept things there she didn't want anyone else to see. Things like what? Things like the real will, Thayer said. A signed copy witnessed by 2 individuals who are still living, and 14 years of personal journals that document in her own handwriting Every attempt she made to contact you, every step Preston took to prevent it, and every detail of Callaway Press that she intended you to know. Eli was quiet. She also left a deadline, Thayer said. There's always a deadline. 30 days. The fraudulent document enters final probate in 30 days. Once it's certified, once the court accepts it as valid, reversing it becomes exponentially more difficult. Not impossible, but the kind of difficult that takes years and costs money. Neither of us has. 30 days, Eli said. 30 days. Eli picked up the envelope, held it, put it back down. I need to tell you something first, Eli said. He looked at Thayer steadily. If this is a play, if there's something in this for you or for someone else, and this story you just told me is the mechanism I'm walking away. I've been in enough situations where someone had a very good reason for me to trust them that turned out to be a reason for them, not for me. That's a reasonable thing to say, Thayer said. I'm not done. Thayer waited. There is a 10-year-old kid asleep in that room. He's my responsibility. Whatever happens in the next 30 days, he's the non-negotiable part. Whatever this is about, whatever she left, whatever you need from me, that kid stays safe and he stays with me, or I'm out. Those are the terms. A pause. Thayer looked at him for a moment, in a way that Eli couldn't quite read, and then something shifted in the old lawyer's face. Small, not quite a smile, but the shape of something that had been closed for a long time and was opening slightly. Mrs. Callaway, Thayer said quietly, would have liked you very much. Did you know her well? For 40 years. A pause. She was the best person I've known. That's not sentiment. That's an accounting. Eli picked up the envelope again, set it back down. Tomorrow, he said. We'll go tomorrow. Birch needs to get to school first. Of course. 8:30 drop-off. I'll meet you after. Thayer stood, straightened his jacket, moved toward the door with the unhurried certainty of a man who had accomplished exactly what he came to do. At the doorway, he stopped. Mr. Merritt. Eli looked at him. She knew about you since you were 4 years old, Thayer said. She never stopped. Not once. Not for a day. I want you to know that before you read the letter. Whatever else you feel when you read it. She never stopped. He left. The door closed quietly. The exhaust fan hummed. Eli sat alone at the kitchen table with an envelope in front of him and his hand pressed flat against the dollar bill in his pocket. He sat there for a long time. He didn't open the letter that night. He tried twice, got the flap halfway lifted, put it back down. Not yet. He went to bed, didn't sleep much, lay in the dark and listened to Savannah settle around him. The city did this. Late at night it went quiet in a specific way, like it was breathing, like something old and large and patient was sleeping under all the brick and the moss and the wide live oak canopies that arched over the squares. He thought about a woman named Gertrude who was 78 years old when she died, who had founded a newspaper, who had written in her journals for 14 years about him. He thought about a man named Daniel Merritt, who had aged out of the same system Eli was aging out of now, who had met someone, who had a son who died. He thought about how thin the line was between existing in somebody's story and simply not existing in it. He was almost asleep when he heard it. A small sound from the other room. He lay still, then padding feet, the particular sound of Birch moving through the dark, the creak of the bad floorboard by the fridge, the sound of the cupboard, then the sound of bread being cut. Eli didn't move. A pause, a longer pause, then Birch's footsteps coming to his doorway. Eli. Yeah. You awake? Yeah. A beat. I made you the bigger half. Eli stared at the ceiling. Something in his chest did something complicated, something that didn't have a name yet, but that he was going to need a name for eventually. You didn't have to do that, he said. I know. A pause. You looked like you needed it. Another pause. Go back to bed, Birch. Okay. Footsteps retreating. The creak of the bad floorboard. Silence. Eli lay in the dark, pressed his hand over his heart. Thought I know what it's like to be that kid, and I'm not going anywhere. The morning was gray, soft, the kind of Savannah summer morning that hadn't decided yet whether it was going to be hot or bearable. Eli walked Birch to school. 6 blocks, past the iron fences and the ancient oaks, and the house on the corner with the purple front door that always made Birch point at it every morning without fail and say something about the color. It's good purple, Birch said. It's a very specific purple, Eli agreed. Like if someone was confident about purple. That's exactly what it is. Birch shouldered his backpack at the gate, looked at Eli the way he did sometimes when he thought something was happening that nobody was telling him about. You'll be back at 3. 3 o'clock, I promise. Where are you going? I'll tell you tonight. That's not reassuring. I know. 3 o'clock, Birch. Birch looked at him one more second, then turned and walked through the gate without looking back. Eli watched until the kid was inside, until the door closed, until there was nothing left to watch. He breathed. Then he turned and walked to meet Thayer. The drive west was quiet. Thayer drove, said almost nothing. Eli sat in the passenger seat with the letter in his jacket pocket, the dollar bill against his heart, and the particular stillness of a person waiting for something that has already started. The city thinned. Neighborhoods gave way to low marshland. Then the land rose slightly and the trees came in. Pine and live oak. The green of this part of the world saturated and ancient and indifferent to everything that happened beneath it. The road narrowed, then narrowed again, and there at the end of a gravel drive marked by nothing except 2 trees growing so close together they'd grown into each other. A double oak, exactly as the dollar bill had said, sat the house, small, wooden, white paint that had done its best and was peacefully tired now, a porch that ran the full width of the front, a garden that had gone its own direction since no one had tended it, which had not in Eli's view made it worse. Wildflowers through the old flower beds, honeysuckle over the porch rail. It looked like a house where someone had been happy. Not dramatically happy, the quiet kind, the private kind, the kind of happy that doesn't need witnesses. Eli got out of the car, stood in the gravel, listened to the sound of this place which was birds and wind, and very little else. She came here to write, Thayer said from beside him. Every June, sometimes October. She said Savannah got loud when she needed to think, and this was where the noise stopped. She came alone, always. Eli looked at the double oak. 2 trees, growing so close together for so long that their bark had fused at the base. You couldn't tell anymore where one ended and the other began. They had simply become one thing, without ceremony, without anyone deciding it. Just time and proximity doing what time and proximity do. He thought about that. Then he followed Thayer up the porch steps and into the house. The west storage was exactly what it said it was. A small room off the back hallway. A wooden door that stuck. Inside shelves. Old paint cans. Garden tools. The smell of dried earth and turpentine and time. And at the back of the room on a shelf at eye level, a metal lockbox. Not large. The size of a shoebox. Older looking than everything else in the room. The lock was a simple key lock. Thayer handed Eli the key. Old metal, slightly warm from the lawyer's pocket. The kind of key that opened something that had been waiting. Eli fitted in, turned it. The click was small and definitive. The sound of something releasing that had been held shut a long time. He opened the lid. Inside, neatly arranged. 2 stacks of notebooks. Composition books, the black and white speckled kind you bought at drugstores. 14 of them. Eli counted without meaning to. The handwriting on the first one's cover said nothing except a year 2010, and under the notebooks, a single manila envelope, sealed with red wax, his name on the front, same handwriting, same careful precision. Below the notebooks in the envelope, a folded document, official-looking, legal paper, notarized with 2 red stamps. Eli unfolded it. He could read enough of the legal language to understand the shape of it. It was a will, a real one, signed by Gertrude May Calloway on April 18th of the previous year, in the presence of 2 named witnesses, executed and witnessed and notarized. Near the bottom, in language Eli had to read 3 times. To Eli Merritt, my grandson, I leave the trusteeship of Callaway Press Community Media Trust to be held and managed in accordance with the terms set out in Schedule A. He stopped reading. He needed a moment. Just a moment. He breathed. In. Out. The smell of the storage room. Old earth. Turpentine. The weight of the notebooks in their 2 stacks. 14 notebooks. 14 years. He picked up the first one. Opened it. January 4th, 2010. Her handwriting, which he recognized now. Careful. Small. Precise. I went to the agency again today. They told me the records were sealed and I had no legal standing as a relative. I explained that I was his paternal grandmother. The woman at the desk was not unkind, but she was very firm. I will try the other avenue, Thayer suggested. I will not stop. He would be 9 years old now. Eli closed the notebook, set it down, picked up the manila envelope, broke the wax seal, unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was shakier here. Later in her life, the letters slightly larger as vision required, but still careful, still her. He read, Eli, if you are reading this, then Thayer did his job and I am gone and we have run out of time to meet. I'm sorry for that. I want you to understand that I'm sorry for that specifically. Not in general, not as a gesture. I'm sorry that I will never know what your voice sounds like, and I'm sorry that you will only ever know me through the words of an old woman in a storage room. I'm going to tell you the truth. All of it. You deserve that more than you deserve comfort. Your father, Daniel, was the best thing I ever did, and the thing I was most afraid of. I was 22 and alone, and I made a choice that I have never once, not for a single day, stopped thinking about. I told myself I was giving him a better life. I was. I was also giving myself a way to continue. Both of those were true. I have spent a long time learning to hold 2 true things at once. He grew up the way you grew up. He aged out the way you are aging out. He was, by all accounts, I was ever able to collect, a good man. Patient. Funny in the quiet way. The kind of person who made other people feel steadied just by being in the room. I heard this from 3 separate people who knew him, and I have no way to verify it, and I believe every word. He met your mother in the fall of 1997. You were born in January of 2000. He died in November of that same year. I did not find any of this out until 2006, when I hired a private investigator and paid her a great deal of money, and she found what the agencies had not been able to find, or had not tried. By the time I knew you had been in the system for 4 years, I tried to find you. I need you to know that I tried. What I need you to also know, what I should have known sooner and did not, is that I trusted the wrong person with too much of my life for too long. I gave Preston authority because he was family, and because I was tired, and because it is easier when you are old and ill to let someone else handle the things that need handling. It is the most expensive mistake I ever made. I am asking you to do something. I know I have no right to ask. I know that. But I'm asking anyway, because there is no one else, and because time runs out eventually for all of us. The real will is in this box. Thayer knows what to do with it. But the fraudulent document that Preston filed will be certified in 30 days, and after that the road back becomes very long and very difficult. What I am asking you to do is be present. Be in the room. Let Thayer fight this for you and be the person he is fighting for. I am not asking you to do it for the newspaper. I am not asking you to do it for me. I am asking you to do it because there is a community of people in Savannah who have been reading those papers for 50 years, and who trust that someone is telling them the truth about their schools and their neighborhoods and their children's futures. And I would like that to stay true. And I would like it to stay true under someone who understands what it costs to be told the truth has nothing to do with you. I think you might understand that better than most. I'm sorry I waited until it was too late. I should have fought harder. You were worth fighting harder for. You always were. Gertrude Eli read the letter twice. Then he folded it carefully. Put it back in the envelope. Put the envelope in his jacket pocket beside the dollar bill. He stood in the small storage room with the 14 notebooks and the late afternoon light coming in through a single high window. 30 days. Birch was at school right now, in room 14 with the teacher who had started to understand that this kid was smarter than his file said. The permanent guardianship hearing was in 2 months. 2 months until a judge decided formally and finally whether Eli got to keep the kid. 2 months. 30 days. The numbers running quietly in the back of his mind like they always did. An old woman had spent 14 years writing in notebooks in a storage room. She had left him $1 and a hidden message, and the only thing he'd ever had that came close to resembling something like a beginning. He thought about Birch, cutting bread in the dark, bringing him the bigger half, because you looked like you needed it. Eli picked up the lockbox. Carefully. The notebooks inside shifted slightly. 14 years of a person's most private and persistent love, the kind you kept even when you had nowhere to put it. He carried it out of the storage room, down the hallway, through the house that smelled like old paper and someone's private summers, out onto the porch. He stood with the lockbox under his arm and looked at the double oak in the gravel drive. 2 trees so long grown together that they'd become one thing, no seam visible anymore. No place where the joining showed. Thayer was waiting by the car, still, patient. 30 days, Eli said. Yes, and you'll tell me what I need to know. Everything I know, everything she left. Eli looked at the double oak one more time. Then he looked at Thayer. I need to pick up Birch at 3, he said. Same as always. Of course. And then we start. Then we start, Thayer agreed. Eli walked to the car. He didn't look back at the house, not because he wasn't moved, because he was, and because some things you had to walk away from in order to carry with you. The dollar was in his pocket. The letter was in his pocket. And somewhere west of Savannah, in a small storage room that smelled of old earth and time, 14 notebooks waited. 30 days. The clock had started. The notebook smelled like her. Eli didn't know what she smelled like. He'd never met her, never been in the same room, never heard her voice or seen her move or known anything about her except what a lawyer had told him and what a dollar bill had sent him to find. But the notebook smelled like someone's private life, like old paper and ink, and the specific warmth of a room that had been written in for a long time, and somehow that was enough to make his chest do something complicated. He started with the first one. January 2010. I went to the agency again today. He read until midnight, then past midnight, then until the gray Savannah dark started to go blue at the edges, and the dry cleaner's exhaust fan kicked on downstairs, and Birch's alarm went off in the back room, small and persistent, and Eli heard the thump of feet hitting floor. He'd been awake the whole night, not because he couldn't sleep, because he couldn't stop. May 2011. I sent a letter to Linden House addressed to the group supervisor. It was returned. The forwarding address was wrong, or made wrong. I am beginning to understand that this is not administrative error. October 2012. Thayer accompanied me in person. We drove to the address. The director met us at the door. She was polite. She said the placement records were sealed pending a transfer. She said Eli had been moved 2 days prior. When I asked where, she said she couldn't release that information. When I asked who had called ahead to inform the home of our visit, she looked at a notepad on her desk and then looked away. She didn't answer. I already knew. March 2014. Preston told me today that I was overextending myself, that the search was taking a toll. He used that word, toll, like emotion was a road tax. He suggested I focus on the paper, on the legacy I'd built. He said, "Some things are better left in the past." Aunt Gertrude. I smiled and said nothing. I have learned over many years that the most important things I've ever done were the ones I kept private from Preston Calloway. Eli set the notebook down, breathed, picked up the next one. 7 notebooks in 2 days. That was the pace. Because there was also breakfast and school drop-off, and the work of being the person Birch needed him to be during every non-notebook hour, which required all of him. The notebooks got the hours between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., and Eli was running on something less than sleep, but more than adrenaline, something like purpose, something he hadn't had a word for before. Thayer came to the farm on the 3rd morning, day 27 on the probate clock, sat across from Eli at the old kitchen table with the notebooks stacked between them, looked at Eli's face, didn't say anything about how he looked, which Eli appreciated. "What do we need?" Eli said. "To invalidate the fraudulent document." Thayer said, "We need one of 2 things, either the original signed will, which is what we have in the lockbox, or sufficient documented evidence of fraud that a court agrees to delay certification while the matter is investigated." "We have the original. We have a copy, witnessed and notarized. It's strong, but Preston's attorney will argue it's a draft, that the document that was filed represents Mrs. Calloway's final intentions, that she changed her mind." "She didn't change her mind." "She didn't. But proving that requires a witness who was present when she signed the original and who can testify credibly to her state of mind. Both witnesses on that document are still living. One has already agreed to speak. The other—" Thayer paused. "The other what?" "Has been contacted by Preston's legal team." Eli looked at him. "Not threatened," Thayer said. "Just spoken with, reminded of various things. The witness is elderly and lives alone and is uncertain whether the fight is worth it at her age. So we might have one witness. We might have one witness. And we have 27 days. 27 days. Eli looked at the notebooks. 14 years in 14 composition books, written in a careful hand that got slightly shakier toward the end. "The journals," he said. "Can we use them?" "As supporting evidence, not as primary proof. A journal is a private document. It demonstrates intent. It demonstrates a pattern. In combination with the copy and the witness, yes, they matter. But alone, they're not enough. Alone, they're not enough." Eli was quiet. "There's something else," Thayer said. "Tell me." "Preston will try to establish that you have no legitimate claim to be involved, that you are his word, I expect opportunistic. A young man who appeared from nowhere to contest a legitimate estate for personal gain." "I appeared from nowhere because someone kept me there." "Yes, and the journals document that. But courts are human institutions, Mr. Merritt, and human institutions respond to narrative. Preston's narrative is cleaner on the surface. His has a name everyone in Savannah knows, and 40 years of civic presence behind it. Yours has nothing. You," Thayer said. "Yours has you." Eli looked at the notebooks again. "Then let's make that enough," he said. Lark DeVoe arrived on a Thursday, day 24. She drove a sensible car, gray, the color of something trying not to be noticed. She was 38 or so, dark hair pulled back clipboard in hand, the specific manner of a professional who had done this kind of visit 100 times and found it entirely unremarkable. "Estate appraisal," she told Thayer on the phone when she called ahead. "Routine inventory of assets held under the Calloway estate. Standard procedure during probate. We'll need access to the property." Which was reasonable. Which was exactly how reasonable things were supposed to sound. Which should have made Eli more suspicious than it did. But he was tired. He'd been awake until 2 again with Notebook 11, and Lark DeVoe was pleasant, and she had credentials, and she asked sensible professional questions about the property, and took notes on her clipboard and admired the garden's wildflowers, and was gone within 90 minutes. And Eli thought okay, and went back to the notebooks. He should have asked more questions. He knew that later. He should have asked why estate appraisal would be ordered before the will had been certified. Should have asked why Preston's legal team would have standing to access a property held under a separate private arrangement. Should have asked Thayer. But he didn't. Because Notebook 12. Because Gertrude had written in Notebook 12 about the day she found out Daniel had died, about sitting in her office at the Callaway Press Building on Abercorn Street and reading the investigator's report and understanding for the first time what she had actually lost. Not just the possibility of him, not just the idea of reconnecting eventually. Him. The actual person named Daniel who had been alive and was now not. She wrote, "I sat for a long time. The phones rang. My assistant knocked twice. I didn't answer. I have built a newspaper on the principle that the truth deserves to be faced. I have fired people for hiding from it. And I sat in my own office and stared at a report about my son's death, and understood perhaps for the first time how the impulse to look away begins. It begins in love. The worst impulses always do." Eli read that paragraph 4 times, so he missed the questions he should have asked. And 4 days after Lark DeVoe's visit, day 20 of the probate clock, Thayer called. "The farm's accounts have been frozen," Thayer said. His voice was flat, the particular flatness of a man containing something large. Eli sat down. "What?" "Preston filed an emergency motion this morning claiming the property may be subject to estate assets and requesting a court order freezing any financial instruments associated with it, pending investigation. The motion was granted on a temporary basis, pending a full hearing. He can't do that. He did it. The property isn't part of the estate. He knows that. He's not trying to win the argument. He's trying to run the clock." A pause. "Mr. Merritt, there's more." Eli waited. He's spoken to 3 attorneys in Savannah, 2 in Beaufort, 1 in Augusta. He's representing to them that you are a fraudulent claimant, that you've been manipulated by parties with a financial interest in contesting the estate, that you appeared from nowhere following Mrs. Callaway's death with an agenda that has nothing to do with her actual wishes. That's false, entirely, and we can prove it. But in the short term, what it means is that finding local counsel willing to associate with this case just became significantly more difficult. Eli stood up, sat back down, stood up again. "He's cutting off every road," he said. "Yes. Before I can even start." "He's very good at this," Thayer said. "He's been doing it a long time." "And DeVoe was his. I confirmed it this morning. The company she cited is registered to a holding entity that traces back to Preston's business interests." Eli put a hand over his mouth. "I let her in," he thought. "I let her in, and I offered her coffee, and I answered her questions, and I said thank you when she left. She probably reported back within the hour." "How much does he know?" Eli said. "Enough. That you have the notebooks, that you're here, that Thayer is involved. Possibly that the copy of the original will exist, though we can't confirm that yet." A long pause. "There's something else," Thayer said for the second time in this conversation, that Eli was beginning to hate. "Say it." This morning's mail included a formal legal notice. Preston Callaway and his wife Sylvia have filed a petition for emergency guardianship of a minor child, a 10-year-old named Birch. The room went silent. Not quiet, silent. The way a room went when something fell into it from a great height. Eli read the petition twice, then a third time, not because he didn't understand the words, but because his brain kept trying to find the part where it stopped meaning what it meant. It didn't stop. The petition cited age of current guardian, financial instability, lack of permanent established housing, history of placement disruptions, and in language that was careful and lawyerly, and devastating the concern that the current guardian was involved in contested legal proceedings that could result in significant instability for the minor child. Everything true on paper, everything arranged to build a false picture. "He doesn't want Birch," Eli said. He said it to Thayer. He said it to the kitchen. He said it to Notebook 12 still open on the table. "No," Thayer agreed. "He wants me to stop. He found the one thing." Eli's voice caught. He made it not catch. "He found the one thing I'd never risk, and he put it on the table." "Yes, if I fight the will, if I show up in that courtroom and challenge the document, his lawyers will use this case against me. Look at this guardian. Look at this instability. Look at this 18-year-old who thinks he can fight a 62-year-old man with a 40-year reputation in this city." "It's a calculated trap," Thayer said quietly. "It's more than calculated." Eli pressed his hand flat on the table, hard. "He knows I'll choose Birch. He's betting that any sane person with any real love for that kid would look at what's on the table and back down." Eli looked at the petition. A 62-year-old man and his wife. Established. Wealthy. A home that the courts would call stable. A reputation in the community. Private schools. Opportunities. Versus Eli Merritt. 18. Tight breakfast budgets most mornings. $420 a month for an apartment above a dry cleaner. Currently involved in contested legal proceedings. On paper it was obvious. On paper there was no contest. Eli had spent his whole life understanding that on paper meant everything and nothing at the same time. He didn't tell Birch that night. He couldn't. He made dinner. Pasta with butter because it was what they had. Birch talked about school, about a project on Georgia's coastline that he was doing with a girl named Petra, who was apparently very serious about the project, and also about being right about everything, which Birch found simultaneously impressive and exhausting. "She said my map was wrong," Birch said. "Was it?" A pause. "Slightly." "So she was right. About the map. About the map she was right. About her general approach to being a person still reviewing." Eli almost laughed. Almost. Birch ate. Eli watched him eat the way he always did, making sure. After dinner, Birch went quietly to his homework without being asked. Eli sat with the cold pasta in front of him and did not eat, and stared at the wall, and thought about the petition in his jacket pocket. Preston Calloway had found the one thing, the only thing, and he had placed it on the table with the calm efficiency of a man who had done this before and expected it to work. 3 in the morning. The worst hours were always 3 in the morning. Eli had learned that early. In the group homes, the bad thoughts came at 3 because the building got quiet and there was nothing left to use as noise. No distraction, no task, just the dark and whatever you were trying not to think about, which became the only thing available to think about. He lay on his bed, stared at the ceiling, thought maybe he's right, thought not Preston, about his motives. His motives are rotten, but about the conclusion. Thought Birch deserves stability, a real home, schools that don't depend on whether Eli can cover next month's expenses, a future that isn't tied to an 18-year-old who is currently in the middle of a legal fight he doesn't fully understand with a man who's been doing this for decades. Thought, maybe loving someone means letting them go somewhere better. Thought, maybe that's what Gertrude thought about Daniel. And look how that turned out. He sat up. That thought arrived like cold water. He sat on the edge of the bed and pressed his palms against his eyes, and sat with the shape of it. Gertrude had let Daniel go. She'd told herself it was better for him. She'd had reasons. Good ones. Real ones. She had spent 30 years after that writing in notebooks about what those reasons cost. Some things are better left in the past, Aunt Gertrude. Not Preston's voice this time. His own. Except it wasn't his. It was the voice that lived in the place fear made. The voice that dressed itself in reasonableness and practicality, and had the specific cadence of giving up without calling it that. Eli stood up, walked down the hallway, stood in the doorway of Birch's room. The kid was asleep on his side facing the window, one arm hanging off the edge of the mattress, the wild hair going every direction as usual. The window showed the savannah dark, a few lights across the rooftops, a sliver of moon. Eli watched Birch breathe, in, out, the slow rhythm of someone who was not worried right now, who was just asleep, who was for this moment entirely safe. He thought about the petition, history of placement disruptions, 7 placements in 2 years. 7 times a door had opened on a room that looked like maybe this time, and then closed. And Birch had learned not to unpack fully, had learned to sleep facing the door, had learned that adults made promises in a specific tone of voice that meant the promise was already dissolving, even as they said it. And then, one afternoon in a caseworker's office, Eli had sat across from a kid with 2 big eyes and said, "I know what it's like to be you, and I'm not going anywhere." He'd meant it. He still meant it. He would not let a legal trap dressed up as concern for the child's welfare teach Birch the lesson that the love of someone who had nothing was worth less than the comfort of someone who had everything. He would not. He walked back to the kitchen table, sat down with notebook 13, kept reading. The guardianship hearing date came in the mail on a Monday, day 17 on the probate clock. The hearing itself was set for 12 days, out day 5 of the probate countdown, which meant both things were happening in the same final week, which was not a coincidence. Preston had timed it deliberately. Thayer confirmed. Create maximum pressure in minimum time. Thayer had retained a family attorney. Her name was Marion Graves, 53, silver ponytail. Glasses she took off when she was making a point and put on when she was reading, which meant her glasses went on and off at a rate that would have been distracting if she hadn't been so clearly precise about everything else. She sat across from Eli at the farm table and said, "I won't pretend this is uncomplicated." "Then don't. You're 18. You've had Birch for under a year on a provisional arrangement. No permanent home of your own. Currently involved in a contested estate proceeding." She looked at him over her glasses, then took them off. "On the other side, we have an established couple, a family name with 4 decades of community presence, private resources, and they will present this as concern for the child, genuine concern. It doesn't matter that it isn't." "It matters to me." "It should, but courts don't rule on what matters to you. They rule on what they can see." She tapped the petition. "What they can see here is a child with a history of disrupted placements being kept by a very young man in the middle of a legal storm. That's the picture." "Then we change the picture." "We try. What I need from you is everything. Every consistent thing. Every promise kept. Every morning, every school drop-off. Every half of the bread," Birch said from the doorway. They both looked at him. He was in his school clothes, backpack on, expression entirely matter-of-fact. "I was listening," he said. "Eli, for how long?" "A while." He came in and sat down at the table, looked at Marion Graves with those big, watchful eyes. "Hi." "Hi," she said. "Are you trying to help Eli keep me?" "Yes." "Good." He looked at Eli. "Because I want to stay." Marion looked between them. "Can you tell me about the bread?" she said carefully. Birch looked at her like she'd asked what color the sky was. "Every morning when there's not much, Eli gives me the bigger half and says he already ate." He paused. Nobody did that before, at any of the other places. They didn't lie about it either. They just didn't give you the bigger half. He shrugged. "That's the main thing." Marion Graves took her glasses off, set them on the table, didn't pick them up again. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay, what?" Birch said. "Okay, I think we're going to be fine." The thing was Eli couldn't be in 2 places at once. Every hour he spent with Marion, preparing for the guardianship hearing, was an hour Thayer spent without him on the will case, Every hour on the will was an hour not preparing for the hearing. 17 days left on the probate clock. The hearing date 12 days out. The math was brutal, and Preston knew it. That was the point of the math. The math was the whole weapon. Eli sat with Thayer on a Wednesday evening, day 15, and looked at what they had. The notarized copy of the original will. Gertrude's journals, all 14. One willing witness. One witness who was wavering. The firm that had dispatched DeVoe under false pretenses. The pattern of blocked communications documented across 14 notebooks. Strong case. Thayer said it. Strong case. But not clean, Eli said. Not clean, Thayer agreed. Courts like clean. Preston will muddy everything he can. He'll claim the journals are fabricated or exaggerated. He'll argue the copy is not the final version. He'll argue your motivations. My motivations. That you are not acting out of respect for Mrs. Calloway's wishes, but out of personal financial interest. A young man with nothing suddenly claiming kinship with a wealthy woman's estate. Eli thought about how easy that story was, about how much easier it was to believe than the true one. The second witness, he said, the one who's wavering. What would it take? Someone to remind her why she agreed in the first place, Thayer said. She is 81 years old and she is frightened of a fight, and Preston's people have done their work on her. But she was there. She watched Gertrude sign that document. She witnessed it because she believed in what it said. He paused. She knew Gertrude for 60 years. Do I get to talk to her? If you want to. Yes, Eli said. I want to. The second witness lived on the east side of Savannah, in a house with a very small yard that was aggressively and lovingly maintained. She was 81. Her name was Frances. She made Eli sit in a chair that was more comfortable than anything he owned, and gave him sweet tea that he drank because she was 81 and you drank the tea. She said, "You look like her a little, around the eyes." Gertrude. No, Daniel. A pause. I knew him briefly, when he was very small, before. Eli said nothing. She talked about him always, Frances said. Every time I saw her, right up until the end. People who didn't know her well thought she'd made her peace with it. She hadn't. She'd just learned to carry it more quietly. Eli looked at his hands. I know what's happening, Frances said. Preston's people called. Came to visit even. Very polite. She paused. They didn't threaten me. They're too careful for that. They just made the shape of the problem very clear and left me in it. And you're scared, Eli said. She looked at him. Yes, she said, simply. I'm 81, and I live alone, and I have 3 grandchildren who live in other states, and a doctor appointment every other Tuesday, and I am very tired of hard things. I understand that. Do you? I've been tired of hard things my whole life. He met her eyes, but she spent 14 years trying to find me. She documented every attempt in 14 notebooks that I have now read, and I know that she didn't stop, not because she expected anything from me, but because she thought I deserved to be found. He paused. She was right, and so do the people who read those newspapers, and so do you. Frances held her sweet tea with both hands. Outside in the yard, a cardinal landed on the fence post and regarded the garden with brief professional interest, then departed. She always said, Frances said slowly, that the most important stories were the ones people thought didn't matter enough to print. The school board meeting nobody covered, the neighborhood park that almost got sold, the obituary of the woman who ran the food pantry for 30 years and was never once in a headline. I read that, in the journals. She meant every word. She looked at him. If Preston controls the paper, those stories stop getting told. Silence. All right, Frances said. All right, I'll testify. She put her glass down with the deliberate care of someone making a decision they intend to keep. When I was a child, my mother told me that the right things were usually the inconvenient things, and the convenient things were usually the wrong ones. She said if you waited until a brave choice was comfortable, you'd be waiting until you were dead. A small, tight smile. She was right about most things. Eli breathed. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet. Preston Calloway has been the biggest name in this city for 30 years. She looked at him steadily. "You understand what you're actually doing here." "I'm starting to." "Good," she said. "Then finish your tea." The letter about the guardianship hearing arrived while Eli was driving Birch home from school. Day 12. He read it at a red light. Birch watched his face. "What is it?" "Date for the hearing. 5 days before the probate deadline." "Is that good or bad?" "I don't know yet." "Which direction is it leaning?" Eli looked at him. 10 years old, asking which direction something was leaning. "Go do your homework," Eli said. "I don't have any." "Then go pretend to do homework so I can think." Birch looked at him for one more second, then turned and looked out the window. "Eli." "Yeah. I want you to know I'm not scared." "Birch, I'm not. Because you promised. And you don't break promises. You're the only person I've ever known who doesn't break promises." A pause. "So I'm not scared." Eli looked at the road. The light had been green for a while. He drove. He was scared. Enough for both of them. But he wasn't going to say that. And then, on a Thursday evening that had been unremarkable in every other way, day 10 on the clock, Sylvia Calloway came to the farm. Not with Preston. Alone. She drove herself. A smaller car than the one they used together. Older. She was wearing a gray cardigan and sensible shoes, and no pearls, which Eli noted because the pearls had been present at the will reading like armor. Without them, she looked smaller, more like a person and less like a role. Thayer had called to say she was coming. His voice had been carefully neutral, in a way that communicated something Eli didn't quite understand yet. "Should I be there?" Eli said. "She asked to meet with the boy first," Thayer said. "Per the guardianship process. The petitioning party is entitled to a supervised visit. The caseworker will be present. And then we'll see." Eli stood in the kitchen while the caseworker sat in the corner with her clipboard, and Sylvia Calloway sat across from Birch at the farm table like it was a table she'd sat at before, which she probably had. She and Gertrude. 60 years. Birch looked at her the way he looked at all adults. With those eyes. Recording. She asked him what he liked about school. He said the coastline project a little, once you got past Petra's confidence about everything. She asked him what he liked about the farm. He said the double oak, and the way the light came through the porch in the late afternoon, and how sometimes at night you could actually see stars. She asked, "Are you happy here?" Birch thought about it. "Happy is a big word," he said. "It is," she agreed. "I'm safe," he said, "and I know what to expect, like I know Eli will be there at 3 o'clock, every single time. And I know in the morning there'll be breakfast even if it's small." He looked at her directly. "Before, with other placements, I didn't know those things. I had to guess every day. Guessing every day is really tiring." Sylvia looked at him. "I imagine it is," she said quietly. "Eli says I don't have to guess anymore." Birch paused. "He keeps being right about that." Sylvia looked down at her hands. She had the same posture she'd had at the will reading table, sitting very straight, hands folded. But something in her face was different from that day, like a window that had been painted shut for a long time and was considering for the first time whether it could open. She poured herself a glass of water from the pitcher on the table, poured a glass for Birch, pushed the fuller one toward him without thinking about it. The automatic gesture of someone who had always instinctively given the bigger share to the person who needed it more. Birch looked at the fuller glass, then looked up at her. Neither of them said anything about it. But something passed between them, small and quiet, and completely real. Sylvia didn't understand in that moment why that made her eyes sting. She just knew it did. She was in her car in the driveway for a long time after the visit. Eli watched from the kitchen window. Thayer stood beside him. Neither said anything. After a while, she got out. She didn't go back inside. She walked to the double oak at the end of the drive and stood there with one hand on the bark, looking at where the two trees had grown into each other, the place where the seam had disappeared entirely. Eli went out. They stood on opposite sides of the tree for a moment. "She loved this tree," Sylvia said. Not to him specifically, just to the air. "I can see why," Eli said. A pause. "Preston doesn't know I'm here." Eli said nothing. The supervisory visit was on the schedule. It was required for the petition. But the conversation I need to have with you wasn't. She looked at him. Her face was composed and exhausted, and something else Eli didn't have a word for yet. "I've been married to Preston Calloway for 29 years. I know who he is. I've known for a long time. And I have made a great many decisions in those 29 years about what I was willing to see and what I would choose not to look at." She paused. "I am very good at choosing not to look at things." Eli said. She was quiet for a moment. She agreed. She reached into her cardigan pocket, pulled out an envelope, standard letter size, slightly crumpled at the edges, the kind that had been taken out and put back several times. She held it out. "After Gertrude died," she said, "I helped clear her room. Preston asked me to do it because he knew I'd want to, and because he trusted me to handle things properly. That was the word he used, properly." Eli took the envelope. "In the drawer beside her bed," Sylvia said, "under the reading lamp, there was a document. I recognized it because I have been present for enough legal proceedings in 29 years to recognize a notarized will." Eli opened the envelope. Inside a photocopy, black and white, 2 pages. He could read the header, could read the date, could read Gertrude May Calloway at the bottom above 2 red notary stamps that translated even in faded black and white. April 18th, the same date as the copy in the lockbox, the same document. "Preston told me to burn it," Sylvia said. "He said it was an old draft, that the final version superseded it, that keeping it would just complicate things." She looked at the envelope in Eli's hands. He was very calm about it. Preston is always calm. He makes everything sound so manageable, so reasonable. Like the obvious thing to do is always the thing that happens to benefit him. "You kept it," Eli said. "I copied it first. Then I let him think I'd burned the original." A pause. "I don't know what made me do that. At the time, I told myself it was just in case." Her hands were at her sides now, very still. "But I think I knew. I think some part of me that I'd been ignoring for 29 years was paying attention and decided that this was the moment." The branches of the double oak moved slightly above them, a small wind coming through. "He doesn't know you have this," Eli said. "No, he'll know eventually. I know." She looked at him steadily. "I filed that petition with him. I was in that room. And I need you to understand that I didn't know at the time. I didn't know that the boy would—" She stopped. "When Preston explained the plan to me, it was abstract. A procedural lever. A way to create enough competing pressure that the estate challenge would become untenable. That you'd back down. That I'd choose Birch over the will. Yes." She held his gaze. "I didn't understand that it would mean sitting across from a 10-year-old who tells you that guessing every day is tiring." Eli said nothing. She looked at the photocopy in his hands. "Gertrude spent her life printing things that deserve to be known," Sylvia said. "She told me once that the bravest thing you could do with truth was not discover it. It was decide to print it, when printing it cost you something." A long beat. "This is going to cost me quite a lot," she said. Eli looked at the photocopy, a 60-year friendship, 14 notebooks, a notarized copy in a metal lockbox, and a photocopy kept in a cardigan pocket for 3 months, because something in a person that she'd been ignoring for 29 years finally quietly decided that enough was enough. The seam where the two things joined, like the double oak, like two separate decisions that had grown together long enough to become one thing. "Thank you," he said. She shook her head. "Don't. Not yet." She looked toward the house. "How is he? The boy?" "He's good," Eli said. "He's actually good." The thing he said about guessing. She pressed her lips together briefly. "I spent 29 years guessing, every morning, wondering which version of Preston I was waking up next to, whether it would be a good day or a careful day, whether I could bring up the thing I'd been not bringing up, or whether today was the wrong day for it." She paused. "It is a very tiring way to live." "I know," Eli said. "I know you do." She looked at him. "You turned out well, I think, given everything." "The jury's still out." "The jury," she said, "is watching you walk through the hardest 10 days of your life and pick that child up from school every afternoon at 3 o'clock. They're paying attention." She went back to her car, drove away down the gravel drive, past the double oak, past the place where two things had grown so long together that you couldn't find the seam. Eli stood in the drive holding a photocopy of a will that a woman had kept in her cardigan pocket for 3 months, because the truest part of her had refused in the end to let it disappear. He breathed, counted the days. 10 left on the clock. 10. He went back inside. Thayer was at the table. Eli set the photocopy down in front of him. The lawyer looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then he looked up at Eli with those still eyes that had seen a great deal and held most of it in reserve. "Well," Thayer said. "Yeah," Eli said. "This changes the balance." "I know." "Significantly." "I know." Eli sat down. "Tell me what we need to do next." Thayer picked up the photocopy, turned it over, looked at both sides. "We need 2 things," he said. "We need Frances on the stand, and we need Sylvia willing to testify about the circumstances under which she found this and what she was asked to do with it." "She'll do it." "You're confident?" Eli thought about a woman standing at a double oak, with her hand on the bark where 2 trees had grown into each other. About 29 years of choosing not to look at things, and one afternoon in which she finally did. "She already decided," he said. "Before she drove out here. The coming out here was her telling us." Thayer looked at him for a moment. "Your grandmother," he said slowly, "used to say that the most important quality in a journalist was the ability to read the room, to walk in and within 30 seconds know what was true and what was being performed and which was which. She wrote that in the notebooks. She said it in life, too." He set the photocopy down. "You have that quality, Mr. Merritt." Eli looked at the photocopy, at the handwriting that matched the will in the lockbox, at the 2 red stamps that meant someone had been there, had witnessed, had decided this was worth making official. Gertrude's signature, slightly unsteady, the hand of someone who had been ill for a while, but was still precise about the things that mattered. He thought about what it cost her to sign it, knowing Preston was in the next room, knowing she might not live long enough for it to matter, signing it anyway. 10 days, Eli said. 10 days. Thayer agreed. "Then let's use all of them." Outside, the last of the afternoon light was settling over the gravel drive. The double oak stood at the end of it, 2 trees that had grown so long together that you couldn't find where one ended and the other began. Somewhere in Savannah, a man named Preston Calloway was sitting in a building that had another person's name on it, certain he had already won, certain the trap would do what traps were supposed to do, certain that everyone in the end had a price. He had no idea that his wife had been paying attention for 29 years. He had no idea she'd been waiting for the right moment to stop choosing not to look. He had no idea what was coming. 10 days was exactly enough time to show him. The last 10 days had a particular quality to them. Not slow, not fast. Something in between the specific density of time when there is too much to do and you understand precisely that it will either be enough or it won't, and understanding that is the only piece available. Eli worked. That was the whole strategy in the end. Not brilliance, not dramatic reversal, just work. The kind of sustained, methodical, and glamorous work that his father, the father he'd never known, the man 3 people had described as patient and funny, in the quiet way might have recognized. Thayer filed the supporting documentation with the court on day 9. The notarized copy of the original will, the 14 journals indexed and tabbed, the paper trail of blocked correspondence organized chronologically, the registration records showing Lark DeVoe's firm connected to Preston's holding entities. Marion Graves prepared for the guardianship hearing on days 8 and 7. She met with Birch twice, once with Eli present and once without, because the court required an independent assessment. She met with his schoolteacher, who said without being asked to elaborate that Birch was the most changed kid she'd seen in 2 years of teaching and changed for the better, and she could describe the specific ways if that would be useful. It would be useful. Marion wrote it all down. On day 6, Frances called Thayer to confirm she would testify. Her voice on the phone, Thayer told Eli afterward, had been steady, the voice of someone who had made a decision and was done revisiting it. On day 5, Sylvia Calloway retained her own attorney. Not Thayer, a different firm, a woman named Dana Reyes on Bull Street, who had a reputation, Thayer said, for taking cases that mattered to her, regardless of the political complications involved. Sylvia filed a separate affidavit detailing the discovery of the photocopy and what she had been instructed to do with it. She CC'd Preston's attorney on the filing. Thayer called Eli when it happened. She copied him on it, Eli said. Yes. So he knows now. He knows now. A pause. How do you think he's taking it? Eli said. I think, Thayer said carefully, that Preston Calloway has not had an unpleasant surprise in a very long time, and I think he is currently experiencing one. Eli thought about that. Good, he said. The guardianship hearing was on a Tuesday. The courthouse on Wright Square. Old building. High ceilings. The smell of official things, paper and floor wax, and the specific gravity of decisions that had been made in this building for a long time. Eli wore the gray button down again. Birch had ironed it again. This time the crease was in a slightly different wrong location, which suggested improvement in the general direction of the process, if not yet in the outcome. Marion Graves sat beside Eli at the respondent's table. She had her glasses on, took them off when the judge entered, put them back on when the first document was introduced. Preston and Sylvia sat at the petitioner's table, across the aisle. Preston looked the same as he had at the will reading, silver at the temples, vest that fit perfectly, the composed face of a man who did not display the things that were happening underneath it. Sylvia did not look at him. She looked at her hands folded on her lap. Then she looked at Eli. And she didn't look away. The hearing ran 4 hours. Marion called the school teacher first. She described Birch's transition from the provisional placement to the current arrangement. She used the word transformation, then caught herself, then said it again, because it was the accurate word and accuracy mattered more than understatement. She described the Coastline Project. She described how Birch had started sitting in the front of the classroom instead of the back. She described the afternoon she'd caught him explaining the Georgia coastal geography to a younger kid during free period, patiently, and without being asked, because somebody wanted to know, and he happened to know it. Then Marion called Birch. He sat in the witness box in his school clothes, the good ones, the ones Eli kept washed and pressed for important days, and he looked at the judge with those 2 big eyes, and he told the truth. He told it plainly. No drama, no performance. He said, I know what it's like to have a bad placement. I've had 7. I know what it feels like when someone is going to leave. Before they leave, you can feel it in how they talk to you, kind of careful and kind of distant at the same time, like they're already saying goodbye. He said Eli doesn't do that. He talks to me like I'm going to be there tomorrow and he's going to be there tomorrow and we're both just figuring out what's for dinner. He said I've never had that before. I didn't know it was something you could have. The room was very quiet after that. Preston's attorney asked careful questions. Professional, reasonable, raised the financial instability concern, raised the age of the guardian concern, raised the ongoing legal proceedings concern. Marion handled each one. She had the pay stubs. She had the lease. She had the school records showing Birch's attendance. Not one absence in 8 months, not one late pickup, not one call that went unanswered. And she had the caseworker's report, which said in the particular language of official documents that was trying not to feel like anything, the current placement demonstrates consistent and appropriate care. The minor child appears well adjusted and securely attached to current guardian. Recommend continuation of existing arrangement, pending permanent determination. Preston's attorney made his closing argument. Eloquent, measured, hit every note. Marion made hers. She didn't use eloquence. She used evidence. Every piece of it. All 8 months of it. The judge asked for a brief recess. Eli sat at the table and did not move, and did not speak, and looked at the grain of the wood in front of him. Marion put her hand briefly on the table near his. Not on his hand, just near it. The gesture of someone who understood the limits of what a gesture could do. Birch, sitting in the gallery with the caseworker, caught Eli's eye when he finally looked up. He gave him the smallest nod, the nod of a 10-year-old who had said what he needed to say, and was done being afraid. Eli gave it back. The judge returned. She was 50-something, precise. The face of someone who had heard a great many things in this room and had long since stopped being surprised by them, and had never stopped being careful about them. She said the court finds in favor of the respondent. The petition for emergency guardianship is denied. The provisional arrangement between Eli Merritt and the minor child is confirmed, pending the permanent hearing, which will proceed as scheduled. She said it the way judges said things, without emphasis, without sentiment. It landed anyway. Eli heard it land in the room. Not loud, just definitive. The way a door closing sounds different from a door being closed. He breathed. Marion gathered her papers with the brisk efficiency of a woman who had prepared for this outcome and was already thinking about the next step. Across the aisle, Preston Calloway was listening to something his attorney was saying in a low voice. His face was composed. Still composed. The face of a man who had been told something he did not like and was currently deciding what to do about it. His eyes moved to Eli's for exactly 2 seconds, and then he looked away. Birch was outside on the courthouse steps when Eli came through the door. He was sitting on the top step in the June heat backpack between his feet, watching the square below like he was taking attendance. Eli sat down beside him. They didn't say anything for a moment. "Well," Birch said, "we're good." Birch nodded slowly, like he was confirming something he'd already calculated. "I told you," he said. "You told me. Because you promised. And you don't break promises. I know." Eli looked at the square, the old trees, the heat rising off the brick. "I know, Birch." Birch picked up his backpack, stood, looked at Eli. "Can we get lunch?" he said. "Real lunch, not crackers." "Yeah," Eli said. "We can get real lunch." They went down the steps together into the Savannah heat. 5 days left on the probate clock. The civil case was in the same courthouse, different room, different register. The will contest hearing was set for day 2, which gave them 3 days of preparation after the guardianship ruling. 3 days that Eli used mostly to read. The rest of the journals, the parts he hadn't gotten to yet, the entries from the later years when Gertrude's handwriting had gotten shakier, but her sentences had gotten cleaner the way some people got cleaner at the end. November 20, 22. I am 67 years old, and I have 12 employees and 200,000 subscribers across 4 newspapers, and I still think about him every day. Not every day with grief, sometimes just as a fact. The way you think about a thing that is true about you whether you want it to be or not. December 2022. Thayer says the document is ready. I signed it today in his office with Francis and a woman from the accounting department named Ruth, who I asked specifically because she has never once in 10 years told me something was fine when it wasn't. I wanted witnesses who told the truth. That seemed right. January 2023. Preston came by today. He was pleasant. He is always pleasant. I watched him pour coffee in my kitchen and talk about the newspaper's Q4 numbers, and I thought about what he has cost me. Not in money. In years. In the specific texture of what those years might have been. He doesn't know that I know. He will never know that I know. But I know. February 2023. I am running out of time and I am not afraid of that. I have made my arrangements. I have done what I can do. The rest is not up to me. It is up to a boy I have never met, and a lawyer I have trusted for 40 years, and the particular mercy or indifference of how things fall. I choose to believe in mercy, not because I have evidence, because the alternative is a colder way to spend whatever time is left. Eli read that entry twice. He closed the notebook, sat with it. Then he went to sleep for the first time in 2 weeks before midnight. The probate hearing was on a Thursday. Day 2. It was not a trial. That clarification mattered. It was a hearing before an estate court judge to determine the validity of competing documents. Quieter than a trial. Smaller, but the stakes were the same. Preston was there. With his attorney, a man named Hargrove, who had a reputation in Savannah that Thayer described neutrally as effective. Eli was there, with Thayer, and Marion present as a courtesy witness should the guardianship matter be referenced. And Francis. 81 years old, in a blue dress she had probably pressed specifically for this sitting very straight in the gallery, with her purse on her lap, and her expression set in the particular way of someone who has decided to be here and is going to stay decided. And Sylvia. Sylvia sat in the gallery on the opposite side from Preston. She did not look at him. She looked at the front of the room with the expression of a woman who had been carrying something for a very long time and had put it down and was still adjusting to the difference in weight. Hargrove went first. He was good. Eli had expected him to be good, and he was. He presented the fraudulent document with the calm confidence of someone who expected it to hold. He argued the copy in the lockbox was a draft. He argued the journals were the private writings of an elderly ill woman and did not constitute legal evidence of intent. He argued that Eli Merritt had appeared in the picture following Gertrude's death with convenient timing and no documented prior relationship. He was precise. He was polished. He was thorough. And then Thayer stood up. Thayer had been practicing law in Savannah for 40 years. He had the specific quality of a man who did not need the room to know he was the most prepared person in it. He just was, and the room always figured it out eventually. He presented the notarized copy of the original will. He presented the documentation of Lark DeVoe's firm's connection to Preston's business entities. He presented the index journals not as primary evidence of intent, but as a documented pattern of behavior that went back 14 years and was consistent throughout. He presented the blocked correspondence records. He presented Sylvia's affidavit. And then he called Francis. She walked to the witness chair with the measured pace of a woman who knew where she was going and wasn't in any hurry because she had already decided, and deciding was the hard part. She sat. She folded her hands. She said I was present when Gertrude Calloway signed the document dated April 18th. I watched her read it. She read it slowly and entirely. She asked one question about a specific clause in the trusteeship terms, and Thayer answered it, and she nodded, and she signed. She was ill, yes. She was not confused. There is a difference, and I have known that woman for 60 years, and I know the difference. She said, the signature on the document that was filed in this proceeding is not the same signature I watched her make. I am not a document examiner, but I have 60 years of looking at her handwriting, and I am telling you it is not the same. Hargrove cross-examined carefully. Francis answered carefully. She did not waver. Then Thayer introduced the photocopy Sylvia had provided, and the court-ordered document examination that had been completed in the 3 days since the guardianship ruling, which Thayer had commissioned the moment Sylvia's affidavit arrived, and which had returned its findings late the previous evening. The findings indicated a measurable inconsistency in the pen pressure and signature formation between the filed document and authenticated samples of Gertrude Calloway's signature from the preceding 2 years. Measurable inconsistency. In the specific language of forensic document examination, those 2 words carried significant weight. Hargrove objected to the examination's timeline. The judge noted the objection. The examination stood. Thayer called Sylvia. She walked to the witness chair without looking at Preston. She sat. She said, "My husband asked me to destroy a document I found in Gertrude Calloway's bedside drawer 3 days after her death. He told me it was an outdated draft. He told me burning it was the responsible thing to do. He was calm. He made it sound reasonable." She said, "I copied it instead. I kept the copy. I am here today because I believe what Gertrude Calloway intended should be honored, and I believe what is in this room is not what she intended. And I am not willing to continue being the person who chooses not to look at things when the cost of not looking is paid by someone else." She said it without drama, without tears, in the steady voice of a woman who had rehearsed this in her own head for 3 months, not because she'd known she would be here, but because she had known this was true, and living with a true thing you refuse to say out loud eventually requires that you either say it or become someone you don't recognize. The room was quiet when she finished. Preston Calloway sat at the petitioner's table and his face was composed, and Eli looked at him and saw for the first time not the man who had blocked 14 years of his grandmother's letters, not the man who had timed a custody petition to weaponize a 10-year-old, not the man who had spent 40 years making himself indispensable to a woman whose legacy he intended to consume. He saw a man who had run out of road, and knew it, and was doing the only thing left available to him, which was to keep the composed face on for as long as he could, because the composed face was the last thing he had, and he was going to hold it until the last possible moment. Eli felt unexpectedly nothing like satisfaction. He felt something quieter than that. Something closer to this is what it looks like when a thing that has been wrong for a long time becomes finally visible. The judge took 2 days to issue her ruling. Eli went back to the apartment with Birch both evenings, made dinner, helped with homework. The coastline project had evolved into something Petra had declared the best project in the class, which Birch reported with the careful neutrality of someone trying not to be too pleased about being told they were right. On the second evening, Birch went to bed early. Eli sat at the kitchen table with the last of the coffee and the quiet of the apartment, and the particular sensation of having done everything he could do, and now having to wait for something that was no longer in his hands. He thought about Gertrude, about what it had cost her, 14 years of trying and being blocked and trying again. 30 years before that of a grief she'd learned to carry quietly. The choice she'd made at 22, that she'd been honest enough to look at clearly, for the rest of her life, without letting the looking become self-destruction. The worst impulses always begin in love. He thought about Daniel Merritt, who had aged out, who had met someone, who had died at 29, who had been described by 3 people who knew him as patient and funny in the quiet way, and the kind of person who made other people feel steadied just by being in the room. He thought about what he carried of that, if he carried any of it. If it was possible to inherit something from someone you'd never met, not in your blood or your bone, but in the way you moved through the world. He thought maybe it was. He thought maybe it happened whether you wanted it to or not, and the only question was whether you paid attention. He went to bed. He slept. The ruling came on a Friday afternoon. Thayer called. Eli was at the school pickup line. 3 o'clock, same as always. "The judge has ruled," Thayer said. "Tell me." "The filed document has been determined to present sufficient irregularities to warrant invalidation pending further forensic review. The original will the copy we submitted has been granted provisional standing while that review proceeds." A pause. The estate cannot be dispersed under the fraudulent document. It is effectively frozen in a state that defaults to the authenticated copy until the review is complete. And how long is the review? 6 to 8 weeks. After which, given the forensic findings, the witness testimony, and Sylvia's affidavit, Thayer's assessment is that the authenticated copy will be certified. Thayer's assessment, Eli said. My assessment, Thayer said, which I try not to give unless I am prepared to stand behind it. Eli looked at the school gate, kids streaming out, the particular contained chaos of 3 o'clock backpacks and noise, and the release of a day's worth of having to be still. There will be further legal proceedings, Thayer said. Preston will not accept this without challenge. He is too careful a man to not have prepared for this possibility. But the position has shifted, significantly, and the narrative has shifted, Eli said. Yes, because Savannah is a small city, and Sylvia Calloway testified in open court. What she said will be known. Eli was quiet for a moment. What happens to her? He said. I don't know yet. She has her own attorney now, her own path. A pause. Mrs. Calloway Gertrude believed that the people who chose honesty at personal cost deserved to land somewhere safe eventually. She said that in the journals. I hope she was right. She usually was, Eli said, based on what I've read. Yes, Thayer said. She usually was. Birch came through the gate at that moment, spotted Eli, made his way through the crowd with the purposeful efficiency of someone who had somewhere to be. I have to go, Eli said. Of course, Mr. Merritt. Eli. A slight pause. Eli, Thayer said, and in the way he said it, the particular quality of a man who had been formal for 40 years, allowing himself briefly not to be there, was something that Eli recognized. Relief. The relief of someone who had been holding something for a very long time and could now at last put part of it down. Thank you, Eli said. He hung up. Birch arrived in front of him. What? Birch said. We won. Birch looked at him for exactly 1 second. Obviously, he said, and walked to the car. That evening they went back to the farm, not for any particular reason, not to do anything. Eli just wanted to be there, wanted to walk through the house and stand on the porch and look at the garden that had gone its own way and was better for it. Birch ran straight to the double oak when they pulled in, climbed partway up the lowest branch which he had apparently identified as climbable on a previous visit, and had been waiting for an opportunity to confirm. Eli watched him from the porch. The late afternoon light came in at that low, summer angle that made everything look like it was being handled carefully. The garden, the gravel drive, the double oak with a 10-year-old in it, who had learned in 8 months to stop sleeping facing the door. He went inside, walked through the house slowly, the small rooms, the old kitchen with the table Gertrude had written at in June, the narrow hallway, the storage room at the back. He stood in the doorway of the storage room. The lockbox was still on the shelf where he'd found it. The notebooks were with Thayer, now evidence. But the shelf remained. The smell remained. Old earth, turpentine. The smell of a room that had been keeping things safe for a long time. He thought about the dollar bill, still in his shirt pocket. He'd moved it from shirt to shirt without really thinking about it, just always there, against whatever was closest to his chest. He took it out now, unfolded it. The pencil marks in the corner faint now from handling West storage. The double oak. Thayer will take you. He looked at it for a long time. A woman 78 years old planning this with the careful specificity of someone who knew she was running out of time, choosing what to leave and where and for whom, knowing she would not be there to see it land, doing it anyway. He thought about what Gertrude had written in her last journal entry. I choose to believe in mercy, not because I have evidence, because the alternative is a colder way to spend whatever time is left. He folded the bill back up, put it in his pocket, not against his heart this time, just in his pocket, like something he was carrying, like something he intended to keep. Birch appeared in the storage room doorway, leaves in his hair, the expression of someone who has recently climbed something and found it satisfactory. "What's in there?" he said. "Used to be notebooks," Eli said. 14 years of someone trying to find me." Birch thought about that. Did she? Eventually. Birch looked around the small room, at the shelves, at the old tools, at the specific quality of a space that had been used for keeping things. "Are we going to live here?" he said. Eli looked at him. "You want to?" Birch shrugged with the studied casualness of someone who wanted something and was not going to perform not wanting it. "There are stars at night," he said. "And the coastline project is done, and the oak is good for climbing. Those are your criteria." "Some of them." Eli looked around the storage room. The house needed work. The garden needed direction. There were legal proceedings still ahead, weeks of them, maybe months. Callaway Press had 4 newspapers and 200 employees, and a community that had been reading those papers for 50 years and would need to understand what had happened and where things stood. He had never run a newspaper. He had run dinner service at Magnolia Table and pipeline work and various seasonal jobs, and he was 18 years old and had $37 left in the account after the legal costs, which Thayer had waived, pending the estate outcome, which was complicated. There was a great deal of complicated still ahead, and here, a 10-year-old in leaves wanting to know if they were going to live somewhere with a climbable tree. "Yeah," Eli said. "I think we're going to live here." Birch nodded. Matter of fact. Like this had been decided some time ago, and he had simply been waiting for the adults to catch up. "Good," he said. "Can we eat? I'm starving." "What do you want?" "Something that's not crackers." "That's a low bar." "It's a tested bar," Birch said. They went to the kitchen. Eli found bread in the bag he'd brought from the apartment. Not much left. He cut it in half, slid the bigger piece across the table. Birch looked at it, looked at Eli. "You already ate," he said. "Yeah," Eli said. Birch picked up the bread, ate it. Neither of them said anything about it. They didn't have to. Later, when Birch was asleep on the old couch with his jacket over him, and the farmhouse had gone quiet around them both, Eli sat on the front porch steps and looked at the drive. The double oak stood at the end of it, dark now against the dark, the shapes of the 2 trunks grown so long together that you couldn't find the line between them, even knowing to look for it. He thought about Gertrude, about Daniel, about a boy named Birch who had learned at 10 years old to sleep facing the door and was slowly learning not to, about what it meant to be found by someone you never met, about what it meant to find someone who needed you before you understood that you needed them back. He thought about all the things he didn't know yet, about newspapers and community trusts and legal proceedings, and what it meant to be someone's grandson after the fact, after the person was gone with nothing but 14 notebooks and a dollar bill and a storage room that smelled of someone's private summers. He thought about what Gertrude had left him, not just the land, not just the paper, not the legal standing or the documented history or even the 14 years of evidence that someone had been looking. She'd left him the shape of something, the outline of what it looked like when a person kept trying, when a person wrote it all down, when a person trusted that the right thing would find its way to the right person, even if the person doing the trusting wouldn't be there to see it. She'd left him a way of being in the world, a way that said the truth deserves to be faced, and the people who have been invisible deserve to be found, and the stories that nobody thinks matter enough to print are the ones that matter most. He could do something with that. He was going to do something with that. The night sounds of the West Georgia farmland came in around him. Crickets in the grass, the occasional call of something in the trees at the property line. The dry cleaner's exhaust fan was far away. Now this was a different kind of quiet. Wider, older, more patient. Eli sat on the porch steps and looked at the double oak and listened to the night and thought about all of it. Then he stopped thinking about it and just sat. The way you sit when you're somewhere you intend to stay. The way you sit when the running is over. Not because you've stopped being afraid. Not because everything is settled and safe and the complicated is all behind you, but because you've found something worth stopping for, and you've decided. The dollar bill was in his pocket. The letter was in the farmhouse on the kitchen table where he'd set it before coming outside, and in the back room on the couch with his jacket over him and the wild hair going every direction on the old pillow, a 10-year-old who had learned that some promises held, that some people showed up at 3 o'clock, that guessing every day was not the only way to live. Eli sat on the porch steps of a house that had belonged to a woman he never met in a county he'd driven through without stopping on a road that led somewhere he hadn't known he was going. And he breathed, in, out, and stayed.